Good afternoon, everybody. Hi there. Can everybody see and hear me? First of all, yeah, a couple of thumbs up. Lovely. As Georgina explained, we're using Slido today. So if I can ask if people can join Slido and log into the Slido app. So it's either sli.do if you're doing it in the web browser, or if you can go along to the Slido app on your mobile phones. My complete apologies for being tardy and late. I have to admit, we've got into the habit now. For those of you that know me, we run the Yorkshire Cybersecurity Cluster webinar on the third Wednesday of every month. And in my head, I thought that 1 o'clock was the dry run, not the actual kickoff. So there you go. So do I feel completely unprepared? I have to openly admit, I absolutely do. But it's okay. We're all good, and we're amongst friends, which is great. So thank you ever so much for all those that have joined and all those that have contributed for getting today on. It's an absolute pleasure from my point of view, because I've known a number of the panelists for quite some time now. I met Martyn from the days when he was at Salvation Army many moons ago, in the early days of cybersecurity. So it's a real pleasure to have him as part of the panel today. So we'll just give a couple of more seconds for the rest of the tardy audience to join, like me, if that's okay, and then we will kick off. So again, if I can just ask if you can go to Slido, which is sli.do.com, sli.do, sorry, or if you go to the Slido app, if that's okay. Lovely. So do we want to sort of test that out then, Georgina? Should we go to the first slide and see if we can get people sort of interacting on Slido, if that's all right?
Yeah. It should move. There we go.
Okay, so just to get everybody up and running and see how many active people we have online, if I can ask if you can go to slido.com, and if you can put in the code E186, and if you can just let us know what it is that you feel that Charities have that's worth stealing. Okay? So if I can just ask you to contribute to that, what is it that audience have that's worth stealing? And then once we've got a bit more interaction from you, we'll get starting with today's webinar. Okay, so while we're waiting to start with then, so just what I will do is, just while we're waiting for more people to join and more people to get onto Slidos, I might actually ask the panel of today's session if they can do a brief introduction about yourselves, if that's okay, and just your interest in the charities sector. So without further ado, if I can ask Martyn, if you can just give a little bit of overview of who you are and where you come from, if that's okay. Is Martyn on the call? Interesting. Okay. So in that case, I'll go to Gary, because I can see Gary on the line.
Hi. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So I'm here representing Cyberfort's group, which is a cybersecurity consultancy and data protection business. My background is cybersecurity and data protection for the last 20 years. And I'm also here as a trustee of Gamers Beat Cancer, because I've been a gamer for as long as I've been in tech as well. So that's me.
Lovely, thank you very much. And apologies, I should have done myself first. So my name's Melanie Oldham. I'm CEO and founder of Bob's Business, and we are a cyber education company that's been operating sort of for a number of years now, helping all industries and all organisations, but we do have quite a large number of charity clients as well. So also, I'm the chair and host of the Yorkshire Cybersecurity Cluster, which is obviously where myself and Gary both come from. Okay, I can also see on the line that we have Geoff. Hi, Geoff. Would you like to do a little bit of background regarding yourself, please?
Sure. Yeah. I'm Geoff White. I'm an investigative journalist, and I've covered technology for, among others, Channel 4 News, BBC News, the Sunday Times, and I've just written a book all about cybercrime, which is going to be released on August 10th. It's called Crime.com. It is everything you wanted to know about cybercrime, but were afraid to ask, told in an entertaining and compelling way. So that's who I am.
Fantastic. Thank you, Geoff. And I can see that Martyn is on the line. So Martyn Croft, if I can go over to you, please. Okay. I'll let Martyn interrupt me when he comes on. But again, for those of you that have joined, we're using Slido today. So Slido's, the intention of Slido is to try and make this webinar as interactive as possible and take some of your questions, if that's okay. So when you go to slido.com, and the number that you put in there is E186. Okay. Martyn, do we have you live and active now? I can see that you're off mic, so please, yeah. Well, we may be having a few technical problems. Okay. And do we have Dan on the line at all?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, Melanie. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dan Patefields, head of the cybersecurity program at Tech UK. Our interest, I suppose, in being here today is to kind of represent the wider cyber industry and how that can support the charity sector. And we'll touch on a few ways that that's already happening later on.
Thank you very much, Dan. And I'm really pleased to sort of welcome as well Saj from LORCA, which is the London Office of Rapid Cyber Acceleration, that I was accelerator program that Bob's Business were fortunate enough to go on last year. So hi, Saj. Okay, we're having problems. Martyn, are you alive yet and on mic? We didn't have this problem in the dry run. Okay, please feel free to speak, Martyn, if you're there. I can see that you're off mic, but are you able to speak? No. Okay. So, okay. Well, we won't sort of delay proceedings anymore. What I'll do then is, if Georgina, if you can pull up the next slide for me, please. Okay. So today's agenda, what we're hoping to cover off through our panel of experts, is what's happening in the charity sector in relation to cybercrime. So what are the risks that we're facing, and particular focus on phishing in the charity sector, and this being a bit of a double-edged sword, without going into too much sort of relieving, sort of giving out too much as to what's going to be discussed in that topic, but very much that phishing is something that sort of from both angles, from organisations and criminals trying to replicate and pretend to be charities, and also charities themselves falling victim to it. And there's a lot around the psychology of the people that both donate and the people that work with charities that potentially make them more susceptible than others to phishing attacks. And then obviously looking at the home working and how that's impacting on charities, how they're working, and the risks that they have. And as I say, we'll delve a little bit further into each one of those topics as we go through today's webinar. And
okay. Can you hear me now?
yes, lovely. So if you can go to the next slide, Georgina, and we can get the rest of the feedback from the panelists. So I think it was Martyn that was trying to speak then. Was that right, Martyn?
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Can you hear me now?
I can indeed, yes.
Brilliant. That's good. Okay, so I was just saying it's really great to be here, despite all the little technical things. I read the other day that the phrase of the year is "you're on mute." And I'm sure we've all been in so many meetings where that's become the norm. I just wanted to say a personal welcome to everybody, and welcome along to this event hosted by the Charities Security Forum with Bob's Business. My background is with the Salvation Army UK, and together with Brian Shorten, who was a colleague, and Brian was working at Cancer Research, we formed the Charities Security Forum back in 2007 to represent the interests of people who were working in information security and charities, with the express aim of increasing the awareness of information security in the third sector. I think we've done that. We've got about 300 members, but we're always looking for more. So if any of the audience isn't a member and wants to join up, it's totally free, and there'll be further details as we go through the rest of the afternoon. That's basically my background, and I'm looking forward to talking a little bit later on.
Lovely. And Brian, do we have you available now?
Hi, yes, fine, Mel. Can everybody hear me?
We certainly can.
Good, okay. Hello, everybody, and as Martyn says, welcome to this afternoon. I'm the co-founder and the chairman of the Charities Security Forum. 30 years of experience of information security across several sectors, ending up with Cancer Research, which is when I met up with Martyn. And being the shy, retiring types that we are, we met up lots of times at events and thought, let's talk to other people, and we couldn't find an organisation that would facilitate that, so we started one. 2007, 7 members, and we're now 300 plus. And we have this, as Martyn says, if you fancy joining, just contact us. We have this thing, don't we, that at every meeting we have to have one new member, one new charity. And so far, touching an awful lot of wood here, we've managed it. So we're still working on that. Hopefully everybody finds this useful. Let's get on with it. You're muted, Mel.
And so I am. So apologies for that, as we have the herd of children running up the stairs. So apologies. So Saj, are you there as well, please?
Hi everyone, I'm Saj Huq, Director of Innovation at Plexel and Director for the London Office for Rapid Cybersecurity Advancement. Sorry, I was on the call originally at the start and then I got kicked out and I think my Wi-Fi dropped. I'm back and I feel like I've got good bandwidth now, so fingers crossed. Just brief background to what we do at Lorcas. So we look to help industry, so across multiple different sectors and across different verticals to really access the cybersecurity market, make it easier to access the cybersecurity market, understand what's happening from a solution development perspective, but also be a conduit to feed in needs requirements into the innovation space, where we also work with startups, scale-ups and other high potential businesses to help them develop their products and their services to hopefully meet those needs and solve the problems that exist on the industry side. So it's a real pleasure to be here today. I'm looking forward to participating in the discussion. Kind of personal objective, engaging with your charity sector more broadly in hopefully accessing cybersecurity solutions and also innovation themes that are coming out from the supply side of the market more innately going forward. So I'm looking forward to working with you all.
Thank you very much. Georgina, next slide, please. So one of the things we asked you at the start over Slido is if you could take a look and let us know what you feel that charities have worth stealing. And the reality is there is a lot there, whether it's access to obviously a lot of the donations that come through or the brand in order to be able to exploit other people through cybercrime. So it's challenging times for us at the moment, and there is a lot that's sort of happening, especially within the charity sector, that's impacting you quite significantly. So one of the purposes of today is to identify sort of the risks that you're facing, so that whilst you're in this turbulent time where a lot of charities are really negatively impacted by the fact that there are large cancellation of events, which is the main income generating for organisations, the fact that a lot of that has now shifted to online generation of donations, your resources are very stretched. There's a decrease in funding as a knock-on, obviously, of not having those events, and an increased demand for services, say, online. And also that shift to home working. But one of the interesting things that I'm going to come on shortly, having looked into the 2020 breaches survey, is that actually charities came out as one of the most significant that actually used to do home working prior to COVID kicking in. So hopefully from that respect, the transition for the charity sector shouldn't be so significant. But again, I'll be interested to know your views. And there has been a significant, as I say, number of attacks, whether that's charities being attacked or people replicating to be charities. So if I can just move on to the next slide, if that's okay, please, Georgina. So again, it's this is a little snippet from the breaches survey that was carried out. And the interesting thing about the breaches survey is this was carried out and published, and it's the figures for 2020, but it was published in March, so is pre-COVID. And as I say, this is the percentage of staff that have used their own devices to carry out work-related activities. So already the charitable sector was already using their own mobile devices, but the question is, were those devices configured and set up correctly in order to be able to deal with the potential risks and threats? From our panel, does anybody have any particular thoughts on home usage? Obviously, Martyn and Brian, having come from the sector, what was your take and remit on people using their own devices for work-related activity?
Are we talking here, do you think, about home working using your own device, or what we used to talk about, which was carrying your own device into the office and using that there. Because I think that
again, you have the insider knowledge, so you let me which take you want to go for that. I don't mind.
Well, bring your own was always a favourite with Charities, because the idea of being able to do away with a technical department, an IT department in the main, who wouldn't have to support devices, was always looked good when you look at the bottom line. If I don't need so many techies, I can do away with them. The trouble is you end up with people carrying their own machines in, which are all different. So you lose all sorts of standardization, and you end up with a system that doesn't work because of that non-standardization. So you end up with a techie who's fixing things continually just to make your machine work with the company's machines or the charity's machines.
Yeah, I support Brian's point of view there. For me, it was a bit of a perpetual nightmare until we really embraced the whole bring your own, because it is a very compelling argument for charities. And if you do it right, it's dead easy. I think the problem is if you do it wrong, it's a nightmare. Getting it under control is difficult. And we really saw it in many charities, people who were coming along and just actually using whatever they could get their hands on. And I know in the CSF, we've long campaigned for people to use, shall we say, proper email addresses rather than public email, because you end up with stuff flying all over the place. And when you think that, what, over 60% of data leakage is going out via email, if that's going into the likes of Gmail, Hotmail and the like, then you're just bleeding data with very little control. So yes, charities are really good at this sort of distributed working pattern, so they're probably taken to it quite easily, but you've got to ask yourself whether the situation has improved over this past 6 months in terms of security.
Lovely, thank you. Just before we continue, can I just ask another quick couple of things to do housekeeping? For those of you that have joined a little bit late, we'll be using Slido today for an interactive question. So if you can go to slido.com and put in the Slido number, which Georgina will tell us in a second. Hopefully it'll come up on the slide where is needed. And also, if I can ask that you put your mic's on mute unless you'd like to ask a question, because if your mic is off mute, I'm likely to come straight to you and say, for example, Dan, did you have any questions or any points to add? Well done, Dan. So just switch that off just in time. And the Slido number is, or the reference is E186 for us to partake. If we can go on to the next slide. Was there anybody else who wanted to add something about bring your own devices? Again, this is a webinar for those charities that have registered on today. So if you've got any questions, any case studies or anything you want to put to the audience, then please feel free to take your mics off mute and I will come to you and ask you the question. Alternatively, you can put the comments into chat as well. Okay, so this following slide is the percentage of that have identified the following types of breach. So this is charities that have identified breaches within the last 12 months. But as I say, this was prior to COVID because the breaches report came out in March of this year. And we're seeing sort of there as the primary ones being fraudulent emails, so phishing, people impersonating organizations in emails or online, viruses, hacking. And what's quite interesting here is actually that there's you know, from a targeting point of view, there isn't a specific difference necessarily between charities and businesses. There are very similar attacks, and I think this is going to lead on to one of the points that Geoff's going to make in his brief overview in a second, which is that you know, criminals aren't necessarily being specific, but what they are being able to do is they're able to use what is happening in current circumstances and what's happening that's really relevant within life on a day-to-day, and actually exploit that to take advantage of our behavior. So they're using very, very topical threats and very topical instances within phishing emails in order to exploit. So again, it's what we know is that a quarter of charities, 26, reported cyber breaches and attacks within the 12 months prior to COVID, and no doubt it has increased. But what is quite nice also from a charity's perspective is that there is a continuing increase in reporting. But the question with regards to that is whether or not the reporting has increased from 19, 22 to 26% because of the reporting is made easier, or whether there's a large increase of reporting, or actually we're just becoming a little bit savvy that potentially we are being victims. So again, I'll be interested to know from a reporting perspective why we feel that the numbers have potentially increased from 19 to 26% pre-COVID. Is it because people are able to identify them, or that the reporting ability is there more? Does anybody from the committee or panel have any comments on that at all? No? Okay, so we'll move on to the next. Just an interesting fact. Okay, so if we can go on to the next, which is Geoff. I understand that you have a sort of a perception of the risks currently faced by charities, past and present, and how that might have differed, especially as a result of COVID.
Yeah, Melanie, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. So yes, I've been covering technology for 10 years as an investigative journalist, 10 plus years, and particularly cybercrime and security. It's really interesting, the development that's gone on over that time. One of the things I've tried to do, so you'll see on screen, that's a big heavy promotion for my book. What I've tried to do in the book is to make it understandable to the general public. So the idea is it could be enjoyed by techies, but understood by everybody. One of the things that I've tried to point out to people is there's a reason cybercrime has got big, and it's partly because there's been a confluence between three groups of cyber criminals: the sort of nation state government level attackers, the kind of organized crime, money grabbing crime group type attackers, and thirdly, the sort of hacktivist, spread the word, get a headline kind of guerrilla type hackers. Previously, those groups always existed, but they tended to be quite separate. You tended to know if you were the subject of a nation state attack versus whether it was some hacktivist in their bedroom hacking into your website to deface it. These things were quite sort of separate. Over the years, they've come together. So you started to see government groups using organized crime tactics. You started to see government groups also using hacktivist tactics. They've come together, and the problem with that is the governments have the time and the money to develop this stuff and to deploy it. The organized crime gangs have the long history of deploying this stuff and getting it out there. So as these two groups come together, you start to get money and time being put together with skills and acumen, and that's what makes it a really dangerous combination. The other thing that this has led to is the attacks have become increasingly indiscriminate. And the reason for that is, if you're an organized cybercrime group, if you're just money motivated, your key thing is just to get your malware as widely spread as possible, to get your ransomware spread as widely as possible. You want as many victims as you possibly can, because you don't know how much money you're going to get from all these different people. So it's what I call the Superman 2 model of cybercrime. You may remember in Superman 2, Richard Pryor played the villain in Superman 2. And his idea was that the banks used to skim off, they used to round up to the nearest dollar, they used to forget the fractions of a cent. So he basically hoovered up those fractions of a cent on every transaction, and he made millions. It's the same in cybercrime. They're not after megabucks from every victim, but they have millions of victims. So their challenge as cybercriminals is to deploy as widely as possible. Now, as you put that together with government hackers, as they start to use the same tools, you start to get government hackers deploying their tools and viruses as widely as possible. We saw that in the WannaCry attack that disproportionately hit the NHS. It just went everywhere. The reason being the WannaCry attack was a tool used by cybercrime gangs. So they want it to go as widely as possible. Net effect of all of this is you used to be able to know, are you going to be a target for hacking or not? Big banks, yes. Huge insurance companies, yes. Government agencies, yes. But a whole bunch of businesses in the high street, probably not. Why would anyone hack us, was the argument. And that's exactly what the NHS thought before WannaCry hit. The problem now is you've got these indiscriminate attacks, organized cybercrime indiscriminate attacks being used by loads of different people, including government hackers. So it's no longer the case that you can sit back and think, am I a target for this? Probably not. Everybody's potentially a target, because what's driving this is these indiscriminate mass attacks. By the way, this came up in the Intelligence and Security Committee report on Russia, which has obviously been in the news over the last 24 hours. Exactly this. In that report, they say exactly this, that Russian government hackers have been working with organized cybercrime groups. And that makes it really difficult for them to attribute attacks to Russia and so on. So I feel I'm backed up by the ISC on this one. What's interesting looking at this from a sort of charity perspective is charities face a number of, I wouldn't say unique, but fairly particular challenges around this. And actually they came up in some of the stats that Melanie threw up earlier. Firstly, that there are limited budgets. Everybody gets that charities have limited budgets. You don't have megabucks to spend on cybersecurity or technology generally. And Brian sort of slightly addressed that in the points he made about not wanting to sort of fund a huge tech department. Again, it was the same in the NHS. The NHS didn't have huge tech departments, massive amounts to spend on cybersecurity, because again, they didn't sort of think they were a threat previous to WannaCry. The other thing is that you have charities have not necessarily big brands. Some of them have big brands, but even if your brand isn't as big as the huge charities, you've still got a valuable and important brand for the people who support you. And again, what I found really interesting in the stats that Melanie threw up from the Breaches survey was the impersonation of charities figure was higher. The impersonation figure was higher for charities than it was for other organizations. And the reason for that is you've got a good brand, you've got a respected brand, and brand people feel sympathy with. So when hackers are trying to tap into your brand and use it and exploit it, they're going to have more joy with charities because charities have these trusted brands. The other thing that I thought was interesting from those figures was that the figure, it was a small one, but the figure on unauthorized use of company IT to carry out cybercrime by insiders was higher for charities than for other organizations. And that again comes back to the point Brian was making about you having lots of people working from home and so on, but also the volunteer force of charities is really interesting. The charity sector, I think, in this way might be unique in that there's so many people who are working on a voluntary basis or a part-time basis for the charity, but have access to your systems. All of those people, I'm afraid to say, will be regarded as low-hanging fruit by hacking groups. The more people you've got in touch with your network, the more people who are using your network, the more options hackers have for targeting people. And if they're at home on their own devices, so much the better. So again, the charity sort of volunteer workforce makes charities uniquely sort of exposed to this. The other thing I want to quickly talk about is there's been some really interesting developments on the cybercrime side that have echoed regulation and legislation. So ransomware, for example, has been a big threat. It's the cash cow for cybercrime. It's funding so much cybercrime. What's interesting recently is that the cybercriminals have combined ransomware with data hacking. So basically, if you hit somebody with ransomware, how do you force them to pay up? How do you convince an organization to pay up? Well, one way is before you put the ransom on the system, you steal a bit of sensitive company data. You then hit the company with ransomware and you say, oh, by the way, we've stolen sensitive company data. So if you're in two minds about whether to pay the ransom, pay up, or we're going to leak all of this sensitive company data. This is the new game. So it's not just ransomware, it's ransomware combined with data leaking. And the reason the cybercrime gangs are doing this is because they've clocked that organizations, thanks to things like GDPR, are now under a regulatory regime whereby sensitive data leaks is something they're going to get fined for. The hackers know this, and they're like, okay, you could pay the ICO's fine for leaking sensitive data, or you could just pay our ransom. Which would you rather do? So there's a cynical operation going on there. And last thing I want to come on to is obviously the impact of coronavirus. You will have seen, obviously, the terrible headlines about coronavirus, hacking sprees and so on. Look, the truth of it is, this is according to Microsoft and the National Cybersecurity Center. There has been no, at the moment, overall rise in cybercrime thanks to coronavirus. What has happened is instead of sending out HMRC spam or Viagra spam, they're sending out COVID spam and coronavirus spam. What's interesting is there's not a lot of evidence that I can see that that's doing them any more good, these cybercrime gangs. They're not getting more infections with their favorite viruses. They're not getting more ransomware payments. So yes, they are sending out coronavirus spam, but it's not like they're having a heyday. What is changing, of course, is the working practices and working from home. Again, I think it's overstated the extent of the risk at the moment. But what really does worry me is for the past year or so, according to the techies I've spoken to, people have been really, hackers and security researchers have been focusing really hard on all that working from home technology that you use. Things like VPNs, things like remote desktop protocol, all the stuff that allows companies to work from home. That's already been under the microscope. My suspicion is that it's that cybercrime gangs are now looking at that and thinking, okay, let's take all that research that was going on and let's speed it up. Let's work out how we can get behind the VPNs. Let's work out how we can hack into those remote desktop protocol systems. Let's work out if there are vulnerabilities in home routers. So the whole working from home thing, for me, the wave of cybercrime hasn't crashed yet, but I do wonder if we're going to get, to steal a phrase, a sort of second wave of that. And again, as has been pointed out, charities are already doing a lot of working from home, so you're further down the track on this. Potentially that's a good thing, that's a win. But I do think just hardening up those working from home protocols and just being aware that you're now facing a lot of people working from a home environment that you don't control. They're not in the office, they're not in the shop. So how are you going to police that? So lots to play with there. It's a bit slapdash, but that's roughly where I'm coming from. I'm very happy to take questions as well. So I'll hand back to Melanie.
Lovely, Geoff. Thank you. And I can see lots of nodding heads there. So again, please, if you've any questions, please put them in the chat channel, and we'll happily respond to them. But Gary, this leads kind of nicely onto your elements of cybercrime. There's a lot of overlap there between, your perceptions, from Geoff's comments. Where does that lead to your views?
Yeah, I mean, in terms, so Geoff, I completely agree with everything you've said. For the longest time, I've studied the evolution of crime and watched how cyber criminals have changed their mode of operation, and so there's nothing unusual in the fact that now, as you said, the coming together of these groups, because they've always done that, from the earliest times of 4chan, when they used to get together to say, guys, I need someone who's really good at hacking remote desktops. I need anybody really good at social engineering. Those skills, those teams, those advanced persistent threats that we've heard about for so long have been there from the beginning, and I think now are just starting to be more and more monetized and innovative in their approach. And I think it was interesting to hear what you was just saying there about the GDPR aspect, the data exfiltration. So taking data before hitting it with ransomware. I think, again, that's been something that's been happening for a very long time. But the interesting thing with GDPR is it adds a little bit of flavor to the soup, if you like, in as much as I've seen in recent weeks and months where they are starting to say, the cyber criminals are saying, look, we've stolen your data, and we're going to expose it if you don't pay up the ransomware, pay up the ransom. But also now they're starting to say, actually, if you don't pay us, we're also going to report you as well to the ICO ourselves. So the criminals themselves have kind of started to, again, it's this evolution of crime. Criminals go where the people are. I mean, that's, people are online and people are remote, and that's what criminals do. They are, irrespective of what they're trying to steal, whether it be personal data, employee data, donors information, all of that. Ultimately, apart from the hack to this, I think ultimately, it's there's a monetary benefit to it. So that's my take on it.
Thank you very much, Gary. We're having a slight technical hitch getting your slides on board, but hopefully your slides will be up in a second. From a charities perspective, can anybody sort of resonate with that? Is anybody who have any questions that they want to ask at this stage? As I say, it's an informative one for you guys. I'd like you to sort of get as much out of this as possible. If not, we'll go on to the slides. Georgina, are we okay to present the slides? Or do you need me to do it from my side?
It was saying it was presenting, but it actually wasn't. Can you see those now?
No, I'm afraid we can't yet. Yes, we can now. Yes, yep, lovely. So Gary.
That's all right.
No problem at all.
I'm not, I think no cybersecurity presentation is complete unless you've got some stats thrown in. But statistics only tell a certain amount of story. Some of these information that we've got here, this was based upon a charity commission survey back in 2019, and they surveyed about 3,500 charities. The thing that's interesting for me is looking between the gaps. So when you hear about things such as 69% think that fraud is a major risk, but only 34% that this 34% think their organization is not vulnerable. We're looking at the topic from two separate sides. But the bit that worries me is things such as the 29% of reported cybercrime to the police. When I speak to any organization, whether it be charities or not, I ask them, do you know, what would you do in the event of a cyber breach? And, the first thing is they would always say, on data breach, I would speak to the IT department, which kind of understand. And then if they have cyber insurance, it will be, then I'll speak to an insurer. And then eventually they'll get to a point where they're starting to talk to someone who's official, like the police, or indeed, think about talking to the ICO. So my question to anyone here, and I'd love to hear someone talk about this, is, do you have a clear understanding, and do you think your charity has a good understanding of what a breach is, and whether they would know what to do in the events it was to happen? So it'd be good to see some answers in the chat. But if you could just move on to the next slide for me a second.
So
please.
Just as we're moving on to that, Martyn, in your opinion, and Brian, from your experience when you were in the charities, do you feel that was the case?
It was difficult to get a response plan together. Difficult to get that engagement. So those numbers certainly resonate with me. And it wasn't until a few years ago that risk really got onto charity agendas. But I think it did across the board. Probably about 5 years ago, charities suddenly woke up to the fact that they should have a risk register. And there's one or two interesting observations that I've come across in a few different charities, whereas cybersecurity wasn't really acknowledged as a risk. It was always seen as an IT problem. And I think that's one of the things that we've sort of tried to work with in the forum, to really sort of shift that up the risk agenda.
I would agree with that. We had a cancer research, we had a risk register, and it was quite robust. But I did have an interesting discussion with the fundraising department, because on the risk register, sorry, on the IT risk register, they wanted to put hacks to websites, whether they were run by the IT department or whether the fundraisers themselves had put them out there on their own behalf, which they were quite prone to do. And we did take a long time working out to them, if we don't control it and we don't protect it, we can't be responsible for it. And that was simply it. It's not ours, so it's not our risk.
I think that's therein lies a bit of a problem, isn't it? Is that a lot of charities are started, by well-intentioned people, and we go back to the remote aspects and the BYOD problem. Is that many charities do start with 2 or 3 people coming together with a great idea and a great initiative, thinking about cybersecurity and data protection probably aren't really that high on their agenda. They just, want to do a good thing for a good reason. Unfortunately, as Geoff's already said, the cyber criminals look at the way that the world works and says, right, well, there's an opportunity there. And I think this is where I often say to people, this is life in long trousers. This is, when you get to a certain point, you've got to start thinking about some of this is a business. Charities, it's a business, whether it's there for profit or not. It's still a business that is managing data.
Yeah, we've got a really mixed audience here of some large organisations and some smaller ones. Is there anybody else, maybe Chris or Mark, that you might have an opinion or a comment on this at all? No? You're all getting a little bit scared that I might pick on you now, aren't you? But please, if you do have a comment, a view or a question, Geoff.
I've got a question on that for mainly Gary, Brian, and Martyn. Is it that when you first start out, is there a stage early on at which it's sort of easier to think about? If you do it early on, can you think about cybersecurity and get that right early on, or is it as much of a challenge for a sort of new startup charity or a newer, smaller charity as it is for a larger one, relatively speaking?
I think that. I think it's one of the things that should be thought of, but it isn't. It's easier to think of security early on. It's difficult, stroke impossible, and very expensive to try and bolt security on after the event. And I remember going to one of our members some years ago, and there was 3 people in an office, and that was it. And I went to see them because they'd not long started. I sat at the desk and had to make sure I didn't kick the server because it was under the desk. And we talked about equipment. Yes, they all had a laptop, but they were all donated and they were all different. I think one had a MacBook and a couple of others had a Windows machine, but they're all different, coming back to being non-standard again. And as we were talking through, and I said about encrypting data, they went, oh yes, we should encrypt the data. And they wrote that down very quickly, encrypt the data. And at the time, they had some trustees who had supplied some money for the charity to run, but they were looking to go for donations, and they were going to add a button on their website, donate here. And I said, for God's sake, don't do that. Get someone who knows what they're doing, who knows about PCI, and put that on properly. Because just putting a donate here button, you're going to lead yourself to just a nightmare. But that was an early stage for charity.
But
I think.
Sorry, Mel, go on.
No, I was going to say, to be honest with you, this you know, as you know, we host these monthly webinars for the Yorkshire Cybersecurity Cluster as well, and one of the things that routinely come up is that cybersecurity and cyber risk is always an add-on. The prime example was everything related to COVID, and we were talking about the hospitality industry and how government guidance had gone out to basically every hospitality, letting them know how they deal with COVID and the returning to work element of it. And of the 42 guidance on how to start operations again, initially in that guidance, there was nothing related to cybersecurity. The information was there, but on another website, but it was dealt with somewhere different. It wasn't as an add-on. And I think from a cybersecurity perspective, again, you know, as a business, we've gone through a number of standards, 27,001 cyber essentials. And I would always argue that it's far easier when you're smaller and you're starting out, because you're embedding really good principles at the core, which you then, you know, continue, grow and adapt as you go on. It's far easier to do it when you are smaller rather than when you're a large organization, you're trying to retrofit everything. I can see you nodding, Gary.
Yeah, I mean, this is it. It's, you know, when you're small, it may seem a complex environment, but, you know, if you are small, and as I'm part of a smaller charity with, you know, 8 people in it, you reach out to people who are specialists in that area. You know, there's plenty of forums online. You know, no one says, well, you know, tax is really difficult, so I'm just going to ignore tax. And, you know, it's kind of, there's fundamental things that you have to do if you are going to be in an operation of business, and a charity is a business. You know, it has to be run like a business. And that's the issue for me, is that people aren't thinking of those basic steps. You know, GDPR is a great catalyst to start having those conversations to people and saying, look, you know, it's about appropriate technical and organizational measures to protect the rights and freedoms of data subjects. Now, appropriate for 3 people in a room is going to become something completely different if you're 30 or 40 or 100. So start when you're 3, you know, start when you're 3 people and write your policies. They don't have to be complex. You don't have to have complex rules, and, you know, you don't have to invest tens of thousands of pounds to protect yourselves. 3 people, do we all agree that we should encrypt our hard drives? How do we encrypt our hard drives? Let's ask Uncle Google. You know, it's, you know, so that there are simple ways and simple things you can do. And I think just on this slide here, this is the bit for me, again, the Charities Commission asked the right question and got an interesting response when it said, you know, do you think that you're doing everything you can to prevent fraud? 85%, yeah, absolutely. 85% said we absolutely do, but almost half didn't have good practice protections in place. So how exactly are you protecting the people that you are who are donors? So if I'm a donor to your charity, how are you protecting my data? And more importantly for yourself, how are you protecting yourself if only half of you are actually implementing not even best practice, but just simply good practice? And that's the bit that I think is really worrying. But you should start early, start young, and grow from there.
Thank you, Gary. And I can see that Chris is very patiently putting his hand up. So the most politest webinar interruption ever. So please go ahead, Chris.
Well, I hope it's not an interruption. Can I start from agreeing with Brian, but also taking slight issue with Gary? In my experience, I'm working with a charity at the moment. There's 20 people. They're lovely, lovely people. They come from all sorts of backgrounds. And the current CEO is the best she's ever done has been a school governor. No, she's got experience in running charities, but she's got no experience of enterprise level IT, and certainly setting up and managing and running a secure environment. But what I really wanted to get to was what on top of that was what Brian said, was that we've now got the situation post-COVID where everybody's looking to be much more distributed. So we've got these groups of people who are security naive, now working from home in a security naive squared environment, because effectively they're trying to be part of their naive security environment in the office, but they're doing it from home where they have got even less involvement in any kind of security. So I think the question really to the group is there a really big need to try to reach out to those people who just they don't know they've got a problem, and if they knew they had a problem, they wouldn't even know really to look at Google, because they stick their head in the sand and say, oh, it's too difficult, and so
Thank you, Chris. And there's so many elements there that I've just got to chip in if I can. And that is one of the things that you've sort of stood out there, is people have different qualities and different capabilities. And actually, one of the things when I was first introduced to ISO 27001, which is that it's a top-down stakeholders, everybody's got to be involved. And I couldn't work out what the value for that was really, because I was like, things have got to be done and you want somebody that does it. But actually, there is a need and a necessity for you to have all your stakeholders involved and everybody to have really good communication, and communication is fundamental to all of this. And good communication is imperative when you have people that are in remote locations working from home, who arguably are in an environment where they feel more comfortable, because there's an actual statistic that shows that when people are in their home environment, they feel less at risk and less threat, and therefore they've not got a heightened sense of awareness. So it's actually a collaborative role. There's certain words in your vocabulary there that I was a little bit cringing a point from Lloyd's comment about from cyber training and education, which is, yes, it's really important to get the messages out there, obviously, whether it's mandatory or not. What's really hard from a training perspective is making something mandatory when you have a large proportion of your population that are voluntary. So that, you have to be seen to be doing something that is really engaging with them. And again, it's about, from a training perspective, and obviously coming from that angle, it's about really good communications and letting people know that actually you're looking to secure them, their home environment, their families, as much as you are the individuals. But the communication, again, is really, really important, because ultimately we are all potential victims of cybercrime, regardless of how technically aware are you. If somebody really wants to phish you, wants to attack you, they absolutely will. So what's really important is that actually the mechanisms for dealing with that breach and dealing with the reporting of that breach is probably more important than anything. And so it's really important that not only do you cover the training, but you cover okay, what happens if something doesn't feel right, if something isn't right, so that you guys can respond. And if you've got poor communication between your techies and your end users, they will not come to you. If they feel threatened by you, or they feel that, okay, slightly intimidated by your knowledge, your language, your tone, then that won't fit. So communication for me, fundamental.
I think that's absolutely right. But all I'd add is that 3 or 4 of the charities I'm working for haven't got any techies. They're not aware of any of the issues that we're talking about. And it's really about getting that awareness. If there were some techies, and if there were some regular sort of updates from somewhere, and that's really one of the things that I'm questioning the forum about. If there were some regular idiots guides to organizations that haven't got any techies, that don't know where to start, what they don't know they need to start, is probably my argument.
Yeah, and there's some great guidance on the NCSC website for charities and small businesses that actually probably fit that bill. But I would also argue that given that 90% of breaches are down to human error, the technology is important to make sure that when something's bad, it captures it. But ultimately, the time and the effort should be about the communication and the education. Gary?
Yeah, no, thank you. And Chris, that was, as you said earlier, Mel, that was the politest sort of interruption. And you were going to take me to task, and I sort of took I held myself back thinking, right, what's he going to tell me? But, it was the politest sort of, right, we haven't got, the head of our charity doesn't have technical skills. I think my response to that, Chris, would simply be, you know, we all have an obligation towards GDPR. You know, the Article 5, it has 6 simple principles. You know, I've worked with a small company, not a charity, but a small company, 2 people, and they said, where do I start? You know, what do I do? It sounds very complex. And I just said, Article 5, print out those 6 principles, and then just tell me how you respond to those. Make those your values. Are you acting lawfully and in a transparent manner? And are you ensuring that you have confidentiality and integrity within everything that you do? And that's where they started. And then from there, it grows roots. It then becomes part of your business. And you don't really need to talk technical. You don't need to talk about IT, not in those senses. And it's because I absolutely understand where you're coming from. I have some sympathy that, you know, a lot of people think cybersecurity is purely just about the technology, but it's about how people use technology. And I think that's the key. So if you keep it simple, you know, it's that keep it simple, KISS, you know, just don't overcomplicate it. And I think start from there and grow from there. And I think you're never going to go far wrong. And I would finally say, go to Brian and to Martyn from the CSF perspective. You know, I'm sure they've got some cheat sheets and whatnot that they would be able to provide. So yeah, that's a great resource. But reach out. People are there to help.
Yeah. Can I just jump in there? I think when we talk about cyber, I think we often do ourselves a disservice, because cyber in most people's eyes it's the internet, it's the network, it is technical, it's what the IT department do. And I'm a user, so why do I have to worry about this? What do you expect me to do about it? Because it's cyber, it's technical. What it comes down to is information. And it doesn't matter whether it's on a screen, whether it's written down on a piece of paper, it's information, you're responsible for it. And on that level, you can do something about that.
I would just finally to say on that point, you're absolutely right, Brian. We do ourselves a disservice. And the best way to think about this is, you know, when we talk about traffic accidents and whatnot, we just talk about road safety. You know, we don't talk about pedestrian safety and car safety. We talk about road safety. Yeah. You know, but it's not about the actual pavement, you know, the concrete that's under our feet. We talk about road safety as a catch-all. And I think that's what we're talking about here. So I personally prefer information governance and information security, but that's semantics and time for another conversation.
And it's showing the age of which we've all been in the industry, where it did used to be information security. From my experience of going on site to see clients, sorry, I've got a bit of feedback from somebody's. Okay, thank you. From my experience from going on site to see charities and going in to chat with them, oh my goodness, I've never had an experience quite like it. I'm very used to clear desk, clear screen, and going into a charities building, you know, respectfully apologies, but to see piles and piles and piles of cards with addresses and information absolutely everywhere just absolutely horrified me. So, you know, I really respect and appreciate that you guys have a lot of information, you contain a lot, and it's about, you know, how's that processed. And unfortunately, the way most people give donations or their information historically was through old information and paper format. Another thing which I found quite interesting was when pre-lockdown, when I went to a charity event and the cards went round, and one of the things that astounded me was that in order to be able to give the additional bit of donation, that what it is escapes me now, but I had to put my name and address on a piece of card. Everything else I could do automatically, but you wanted me amongst an audience of 250 people to write my name and address on a piece of card to somebody I didn't know in a room full of information security professionals. And I was like, no, it's not gonna happen. So
I did once raise at sorry Mel to interrupt. I did once raise at Cancer Research because a lot of people were ringing in to make donations, and I did raise the recommendation that we should use as a system, and I can't remember what it's called, where you can actually put the number of your card, etc., into the phone, and you don't have to talk to people. And the answer I got was, yes, that was right, but we do like to talk to our supporters. We don't want to have them just ring in, press numbers and hang up. We like to talk to them because often they are impacted by cancer, and therefore we like to talk to them. And I couldn't get around that.
I think I can just jump in, Mel. Having listened fascinatedly to the conversation, I was thinking all the time, I would have to put my CIO hat on, not my CISO hat, my CIO hat, because I think, you know, picking up what you were saying, Chris, it's not about making this about IT. It's about who's actually leading this charity and how do you do things, not as Brian has said and as Gary has said, how do you bolt things on after the event. I think it would be great to be able to get involved with a startup charity and see if you can build it securely to start with. And I think it'd be an awful lot easier than some of the things that I've seen in various charities where you're trying to play catch up and get ahead of the game. It's not an easy gig at all.
No, and we have a question that's come in that says, do we think that the recent news and changing international order will mean a further uptick in cyber threats from hostile states? Oh my goodness, they're coming a bit further field. Does any one of the panelists want to tackle that one?
I'll go for first. I think the ISC report that came out of the last 24 hours or so was really interesting because, you know, much as that does apply to Russia, you can apply it to lots of other states as well. And again, I think in times gone by, you could sort of, as a charity, work out, well, am I going to be a target for those heavy end threats or not? So if you're working in things like human rights, for example, you're probably going to get quite a lot of sniffing around from heavyweight government hackers. But you could think, well, if we're, you know, a charity's not connected to any of those thorny issues, we might not be. As I say, the hazard now is that because governments and states are using indiscriminate cybercrime tools, you could end up, even though you're not necessarily a target for a government hacker, you could end up, you know, pulled into one of those sort of cybercrime campaigns. But just going back, I'll hand over to the panelists in a sec. Just going back to the stuff about what, you know, charities can do from an attacker perspective. Frankly, anything you do as a charity, any step you can take, no matter how small. And again, if you've got somebody at the top who's not really massively au fait with IT, don't hit them with everything and say, we've got to do all this stuff. Just say, look, let's do one thing. It could be that one thing is the one thing that an attacker was going to exploit that they then can't. It could be the next day they were going to exploit it and they can't. So even doing one thing will just lift you a little bit higher than where you were before. And I think that's maybe a good way to do it, because otherwise there's so many things to patch every hole and to patch everything. It's so difficult to do. But every single thing you do, no matter how small, is a step in the right direction. That's sometimes how I know organizations have managed to convince people inside is not hit them with everything, but just say, look, let's do one thing, let's pick one thing and just do it. Okay, we've done that. What's the next thing?
Absolutely, and marginal gain is an absolute, you know, a real good one, especially when it comes to training and awareness, because there is so much that you're trying to address and information you're going to give. Concentrate on one thing and do one thing really well. So whether that is just pushing 2FA, which will reduce the risks of most phishing attacks, you know, doing that and making that your target in your messaging for a fixed period of time, try and get everybody on, just, you know, combat things in bite-sized chunks. So the question that's been posed, we've only had a couple of responses, so just to check that everybody knows that we're using Slido for some interactivity. And the question here is, who loses out? And obviously the responses we're getting is the brand, the public, the society, charities, and everybody. But more importantly, it's those people that are actually going to benefit from those charities. They're the ones that are missing out, the ones who are already in need, the ones that have been identified for those charities existing in the first place. And I think that's the real sad thing. And unfortunately, cyber criminals don't have those ethics to know the impact that they are having. Does anybody have any sort of comments on, I guess from those online at the moment, as to who has lost out, if they've got any particular examples? Sorry, Saj, I can see that you've taken yourself off mute.
Yeah, I was actually going to just a few reflections given the conversation. I think it's been really interesting, actually. So won't answer that question directly, but just picking up on something Geoff said about what charities can do. I think one thing that we may not have discussed enough is the third-party risk element, which is presented towards charities, because, you know, I think one of the other panelists said earlier, there's a lot of organizations in this space who don't actually have you know, an IT capability in-house. They outsource a lot, they rely on third parties to provide services and essential services. And I think coupled with that, you know, the operating model of charities is actually quite progressive in some spaces where, you know, you've got a lot of field-based staff as well. You've got people doing stuff outside of, you know, traditional office environments. And then, you know, coupled with the fact that, you know, there's a whole kind of array of assets which are being utilised, personal, corporate type assets. I think the third party perspective is quite a big potentially risk factor to think about, and I guess one kind of is something we're seeing in a lot of our research, in that supply chain risk in cybersecurity is increasing quite a lot generally across every industry, because even in, I guess, if you think about sectors where there's a lot more spend on cybersecurity, such as financial services, for example, it's a lot easier to penetrate an organization through the supply chain than it is to go direct into an organization at the front door. So that's one kind of thing, a bit of advice, is trying to hold suppliers to account a bit more on what they're doing about security, and how, what assurance are they providing as part of the services that they render, I think is definitely worth thinking about. And then lastly, I think, to Geoff's point around commodity attacks, and being, well, commodity attacks, as the NCSC call them, and the indiscriminate nature of some cybersecurity attacks, I think that, coupled with the supply chain vector, is a growing threat. So, and that was very much what was seen with WannaCry, NotPetya, a couple of years ago, where you result of a kind of commodity ransomware attack, which hit far and wide, also exemplified who and how organizations were actually intertwined across digital supply chains, because that's not always evident, especially when you're using cloud-based services and other types of products as well. So yeah, just a few reflections I just wanted to throw out, Mel.
No, absolutely, and some really valid points there is that you've not got to take the onus and the responsibility completely on your shoulders, because with Charities, by the very virtue of the way that you work very collaboratively, and you take the support and the help from other people, whether that's venues. And I think it's a simple and a fair expectation to ask each of those supply chain, what are you doing, or what are you doing to protect information in cybersecurity? Dan, did you want to add?
Yeah, just picking up on what Saj has said, and bringing it back to the people underpinning cybersecurity, I suppose. I think what's been said already is true. People are a big vulnerability sometimes, and sometimes are the best defenders. And I think increasingly after COVID-19, there'll be, a broader awareness. We've all faced challenges, not just working from home, but, shopping online, socializing online. So I think that'll improve over time. A slightly more positive note, I think, we're all techies now, I suppose. And the second point I'd like to make is you also need to focus on the people that are delivering the solutions. There's a lot of marketing noise in the cyber industry. There's a lot of people saying that they've got a technological silver bullet, and that's never true. So, there's ways that you can do some due diligence around who you're partnering with and things like that, and whether they're associated with organisations like Martyn and Brian run, or whether the Tech UK members are in the Yorkshire Cybersecurity Cluster. Those companies that are involved in events like this and things like those tend to be responsible, reasonable companies. So I think that's a good starting point for kind of getting some good intel.
That's great, Dan. Thank you. So, so we'll just move swiftly on to one of the biggest threats, obviously, that's coming up in the agenda, which is phishing, and it being a double-edged sword. And I'm going to hand over to Martyn for this. But one of the things that brought this about was the fact that, again, that from a risk perspective, there's two elements. There's the risk to the employees, but also there's people using your brands and your organization as a means to phishing people. And the nature of people that give donations and those that support charities, they are very trusting and caring community that want to give. So therefore they respond to a lot of the psychological triggers that are actually put into a lot of phishing emails. And I think making the people that you have and you employ aware of the psychological triggers that appear in phishing emails and how they may respond to them is a good start to sort of getting them to think about, okay, should I question, the emails that come through to me? But if it's okay with you, Martyn, I'll hand over to you.
Oh, okay, thank you. I was very struck by the figures from the 2020 breaches report that fraudulent email is the top of the list, 85% in the charity sector. And that just sort of highlights why phishing seems to be the mechanism of choice, certainly to exploit charities, but also a similar percentage in business as well. But we often say that charities are unique and face unique challenges. I think that's probably why charities sort of come about. But they're all reliant on people who just want to help. And I think it's important to remember that. And whether it's the staff that work for a charity, or whether it's the volunteers or the supporters and the donors who give money and time to ensure that the charity can get on with its good works, whatever that may be, makes it quite a unique sector with no real parallels either in public sector or private sector. But having said that, when you look at the figures, the total income of charities in the UK is about £50 billion. Now, that's a sizable sector, and about half of that money comes from individuals. So when you look at it in that perspective as a juicy target, you can understand why some of the bad guys sort of want a piece of the action. And what charities have become extremely good at is taking your money, whether that's putting coins in the tin in the old days, or whether that's taking online payments through payment card. We've become extremely good at doing that and giving you nothing much in return other than a warm, fuzzy feeling. And the fact that we do that with some anonymity means that it's a really, really interesting mechanism if you want to be a bad guy, because it helps you hide behind those things of the internet and the anonymity that the internet, of course, gives you, largely, although I think things have changed. But I just want to focus on appeals, because we're getting to the time where there'll be an awful lot of fundraising appeals, and charities are losing a lot of money over this past few months. I think quite a sizable chunk of money is going out, and it's going to be difficult to get replaced. So I think we're going to see an awful lot of fundraising appeals coming around the corner, and largely it's going to be via the mechanism of choice, which is everything that we have on internet. So whether that's social media, online website donations, but frequently it comes from through email, and that just opens up that whole channel for legitimate actors to be sending out appeals, but also the bad guys to send out similar appeals. So a question is, how do you really know the difference? And there are a few things to look for based on some research that I did quite some time ago, when we used to take all our donations globally for the Salvation Army through a single facility. So it had a massive data set that allowed us to analyse how and when those donations came through in relation to major events and major crises. And when I started to look at that data, what I saw was that around about 6 or 7 days after an event, so Hurricane Katrina, the Indonesian tsunami, you see a massive spike in donations. Now, interestingly, if you're a fundraiser, if you're a marketing person, then that becomes a really good time to launch your campaign. I think the interesting thing that I found in the data also, and this has been borne out subsequently talking to colleagues over the years, is that actually the bad guys know all this stuff as well. So you see those spikes in phishing emails. And one of the things that is easy to observe when you start to examine those types of phishing emails is that it's got a different psychology to it. It's a different appeal. So I'm sure we've all had phishing emails that basically go along the lines of, something bad will happen if you don't do this. So, for example, if you don't update your details, I'm going to suspend your PayPal account. Or I've seen some really good ones over the past few months. If you don't update your details, your TV license is going to expire. Really? Do I care? What's the net effect of that? Not an awful lot. But when you look at charity phishing emails, if you can lay your hands on any, just analyse them a bit, because the psychology is different. What it says is, something bad in the world has happened. Please send money, update details, and help me put it right. That's a different call to action. And people quite expect to respond to that. And it's that human thing. It's that what shall I do? That feeling of helplessness that I'm sure we've all been experiencing over the past few months. This thing's gone on for 6 or 7 days. Oh my goodness, what can I do about it? I feel helpless. I need to respond to that. And all it takes is a phishing email to drop into your inbox, to play on those emotions. And before you know it, you're onto a dodgy website that you've not fully checked out, probably looks very legit. How would you tell the difference? And you've clicked the button and you're putting in your payment card details, you're putting in your name and address because you think you're going to get a nice thank you, you're putting in your mother's maiden name and your inside leg measurement to boot. And you've not really checked it out. And I've seen quite a few cases over the years where those sort of spoof websites have managed to garner quite a lot of data, information and money. And it's only after the event that people have thought, once they've pressed the commit button, the submit button, the pay button, and then had a moment's reflection to think, I wonder if that was a legitimate website. Of course, at that point, it's too late. Where do you go? What do you do? It's really difficult to take that step back and to stop yourself doing that very human thing of contributing to help to the problem. And then, of course, I think what I just want to finally say is that's a double-edged sword, because those donations are getting diverted. So they're not going to make it through to the charity. And actually, if they don't make it through to the charity, then they're not going to end up with the beneficiaries who the charity is trying to help. So that money just disappears down a bit of a black hole. And I do wonder if there's any way that that ever gets measured. I'd be interested to know if anybody's got any experience of trying to measure those diverted donations. I'm probably thinking about it like measuring excess deaths, which has become an interesting bit of data science. So how do you do that? And then lastly, I just want to point out that technically it's actually proceeds of crime if you're getting some of that money back via another route, which is what we're going to touch upon, and the question that you have in front of you. How do you validate credit card numbers that you've stolen? I'll tell you, the simple answer is that, I can say you can sell them on the dark web without validation. Actually, you can do better. You can validate those credit card numbers. You make small donations to charities. Donate £1 here, 10 quid there. Be generous, give them $100. It's not your card. So if you get a thank you very much for your donation, then you know it's a good card and that one goes on the good pile. If you get a card declined, then you chuck that one in the bin and move on to the next. It's something we all ought to think about, and I know that talking with other charities over the past few years, it is a bit of an issue. It's a constant underlying stream, and it's something that I don't think everybody's totally aware of. So I'll finish there. I'd be glad to take a few questions.
I think that's a really interesting point, Martyn, and I'd never really thought about how criminals basically validate credit cards using charities. It hadn't occurred to me. But do you know, has that, on the reverse, it negatively impacted charities? Has any of the authorities tried to take the money back from the charities once it's been handed over? Obviously, you guys don't want to be processing illegal monies, but what's the process, and or is it like anything else? Once it's gone and it's in your hands, to your advantage. Again, it just lots of things that fling into my head when we mention this.
It's very messy in my experience talking to a number of charities. Some do go to great pains to identify those fraudulent contributions, and some are oblivious to it. So it just makes charity work one more complex issue, but something that, again, when we talked about risk and getting these things acknowledged at board level, how do you bring those things to the board, and do you have a department that looks at repatriating that money? Some do, I know that, but then again, some don't.
Like I say, a really, really, really interesting topic. So thank you for that, Martyn. Does anybody have any questions for Martyn? Gary?
Yeah, we're just going to come in just, to Martyn, really, that, departments, having a department that is focused on this kind of thing. Of course, back to Chris's comments earlier, that you know, you're a small charity, you probably haven't got those kind of resources. What do you think are some of the basic steps that people should be taking or could be taking in charities to try and combat this? Just what are the simple things that they could do, do you think?
I think these days I'd be tempted to, I think you touched on it already, Gary, to essentially outsource that. And I know that a lot of charities do. And I think that's not a bad way of tackling it. Basically, it's the transference of the risk to somebody, make it somebody else's problem. And I think you can do that. But then, yeah, the other thing you've got to do is you've got to analyse the data. Just have a look at it. Does it look right? Are you getting a lot of low-level transactions? There's a bit of a famous story that people might have heard from me. And I won't bore you with it now, but we might touch on it. But I actually had a guy in the audience who said, yes, that was my charity, who took the £1.
Right.
And whilst he was aware of it, they didn't sort of do anything about it. But I did say to him, so can I have my money back now then?
Yeah, it is an interesting one, and I think I would agree with you that, you know, outsourcing is a good way to try and combat this. But it comes back to good old GDPR, as things often do, which is, you know, get the basics right. You know, it's about putting your hand on heart and saying we've got processes, practices in place to try and validate as far as humanly possible that, you know, we are transacting in a lawful manner, and whether that's people's general data or financial data as well. So as you said, you know, if people are transacting, if the amount looks unusually small, then perhaps, you know that's something to be aware of. But if certain information doesn't line up, then again, you know, does it ring true?
I think, yeah, and certainly within the context of banking, for example, and the FCA and PRA regulations and all the anti-money laundering regulation that we've got to comply with these days, it's an interesting area that I wonder if charities are fully aware and fully compliant. It'd be interesting to hear from our audience if we've got any views on that.
Yeah, I think one of the things, whilst we wait for any questions to come through on chat, that has come quite apparent is we've still got 2 more topics to cover and 10 minutes left. And I think one of the questions we were doing from the purpose of running this webinar was to find out if there was an interest and a need to do it. And I think there's, you know, highlighted there is, and there's lots of topic areas that we could go on to expand to make this as a sequence of webinars that would help obviously benefit you. One of the other reasons for having Saj on the call is to actually, the LORCA are trying to get to the root of the problems that a lot of cybersecurity, a lot of companies are facing when it comes to cybersecurity. So one of the things they're particularly asking is, as charities, would you be happy or willing to do a sort of a needs accelerator to find out what problems are you facing, potentially targeted slightly more at the larger charitable sector side of things, to say, okay, do you have any particular problems related to cybersecurity that you want to challenge, you want to question, that the companies within the LORCA cohort might have a technical solution or an option to be able to fill that. So again, just food for thought for the next one. And then I think we're going on to Brian, who has some comments and advice on obviously homeworking and what should we as charities be looking to make sure the advice we're giving to those home workers who obviously have been potentially working at home for some time, to make sure that they're staying secure.
Okay, thanks, Mel. I'm conscious that conscious of the time. I'm also conscious that we're talking about users, but I'm talking to security professionals. So I'm not going to give you a list of stuff that you already know, but I had to think about if I were in your position and I was still with a charity and I had a lot more people working from home, what would I advise them to look out for? And as I say, conscious of the time, I'm going to be fairly quick on this. The heading there, secure the information. It struck me that you're suddenly sitting at home. There may be others in the house. You need to make sure who can see the screen. If you're sitting at a table and people are walking around behind you, they can't help but see what's on the screen. So you need to make sure that if it's confidential for the charity, you're the only one who can see it. If you go away, if you go and use the loo, you make yourself a cup of coffee or whatever, then lock the screen as you would in the office, because you lock the screen when you're in the office, don't you? If you're on a Zoom call similar to this, make sure who can listen into the information. My wife was listening in earlier. She was getting ready to go shopping. I don't think any of it was at all interesting to her, but she could hear what we were talking about. And if you print out what you've got on the screen, be careful of that. It as I said earlier, it doesn't cease to be secure information just because you printed it. Make sure you don't leave that lying around or just chuck it in the bin to go out with the rest of the rubbish. If you have a query about something while you're working, in the same way that maybe you had the same thing in the office and you would walk out to go over to the IT guys, go to your security, what do you think of this? Something like a phishing email, something along those lines. Just because you're sitting at home, don't be frightened to ring somebody, to call somebody and say, this doesn't look right. It's what they're there for, and it's part of your protection. Securing the equipment. Now, this is going to depend, of course, on whether it's your machine. Do you normally work from home and you've taken the laptop from the office and you're working at home? Or did your boss say, well, work from home, you've got a laptop, haven't you? We'll speak later. In either case, make sure your malware is up to date. You do have malware, of course. Make sure that when it says it's going to be updated, that it goes through. Make sure your router's secure. Make sure it's got a password on that, and you know who's got access to that. If it comes down to you having to be responsible for backing up the data, could happen. In that case, make sure you do take backups. The difference between professionals and amateurs is professionals take backups, and that's, in my opinion, that's the difference there. And make sure, as I said earlier about locking your screen when you walk away from it, have a secure password. Make sure you use it whenever you walk away from the screen. When you finish for the day, close the machine down, so the next day or the next time you have to log in again. That's securing the equipment. Secure yourself. There must be lots of people who are sitting, I think looking around the little pictures here, it's difficult to see, but I'm certainly sitting at the kitchen table because the light's better for a Zoom call. However, there are lots of people who will be sitting on the sofa with their feet up, with a laptop or an iPad balanced on their lap, and they're working like that. It's comfortable, yeah. It's not as good for your back and as good for your posture as sitting at a desk is, but it's comfortable. If you don't move from there even to get a drink, you could be sitting there unmoving for, I don't know, all day, and that's not good for your back. If you were sitting in the office in something similar, health and safety would tell you to move, because that's what their job is. I have on, lots of us now have smartphones that tell you about moving. If I don't move for an hour, my phone tells me to get up and walk about. There's no reason why you can't just use a clock and do the same thing. But that, to my mind, that comes under looking after yourself, securing yourself. The other thing, when you're sitting down, have a drink, have some water. And I would also say it's very, very easy if you're working from home to start work early. You pick up the laptop, you pick up the iPad. At work, you would be starting at 9 o'clock, where you might be sitting down from 8 in the morning, and then work all through the day and work late in the evening. Don't do that. And when your boss says you're only sitting at home, do some more work. Point out that you're doing quite enough already. I put that under the heading of secure yourself. I'm sorry, am I overrunning a bit? I make it 14:27. How is that for timing?
Thank you very much, Brian. And I think one of the things to sort of just wrap up that, some of those seemed like not necessarily cybersecurity advice, but personal advice. And the thing I'd say to that is actually they're all kind of somewhat interlinked, because there's an argument that you react and you behave differently to incoming communications when you are tired, when you are hungry, and when you have got information overload. So they're actually really important that you actually stay focused and stay alert. And you can't do that if you are hungry, thirsty, and tired. So,
I think if I could just jump in, Mal, the other really interesting point around that is that you're more likely to make mistakes. And we've just seen that massive outage caused by Cloudflare, where it turns out The problem was a typo, a misconfiguration by somebody presumably working from home.
Absolutely. And I am conscious of time and I'm a bit of a stickler for time, but if anybody wants to stay online afterwards, we won't kick you out, so you can ask them, but I will make sure that we wrap up and get everything in that we need to. So obviously in the openness of trying to give you as much information and much advice as possible, I did suggest that if you wanted to get a little bit more into your needs and your wants from a cybersecurity perspective, then you could contact Saj at Lorca. But Saj, did you want to briefly talk about Lorca Live?
Yeah, so we're holding an event on, well, the week of the 14th of September, our annual event. So there'll be lots of different kind of content streams. So it's a week-long virtual event, but it's not all live. So don't worry, you won't be on Zoom for a week, end to end. In effect, we're creating this platform which we'll release during that week, and it will host a lot of written articles about kind of eminent security topics, some of the research we've been doing, interviews with kind of thought leaders in this space as well as some audio content such as podcasts and videos as well. Each day throughout the week, there'll be a live broadcast for 60 minutes at 4:30, and we've got some quite high profile speakers lined up for those slots. So they'll be covering everything from what's emerging in the cybersecurity space from a threat perspective through to what's happening from an innovation perspective, as well as some representatives across the UK government as well, such as a few ministers who'll be talking about policy direction as well. So in summary, quite an extensive kind of collection of insights. It's completely free to attend. So the website for it will be going live shortly. But if you go to our website, www.lorca.co.uk, in the next week we'll have the kind of pre-registration form. So I'd encourage you to sign up if you're interested, and we look forward to seeing you there.
Thank you very much. And if we go to the next slide, please, Georgina. So thank you very much for those of you that have attended today. I hope that you found some nuggets of information, the sharing of information. That's the purpose of this. And we would really welcome your feedback and your thoughts if you would like to think about hosting another event similar to this nature. So obviously the details on the screen are for if you're wanting to register with the Charities Forum. And I would like to thank the Charities Forum, Lorca, Cyberfort and Tech UK for all their contributions today. And also, I think we might have lost our guest speaker, Geoff White. Again, thank you for his contributions on today, very much appreciated. And obviously he's got a book that he'd love you all to download and read, and would make great reading. If I can ask for the next slide, Georgina, if anybody does have any questions that they would like to pose or ask any of us, please do get in contact directly. From a Bob's Business perspective, and just a way of thanking you for today, I've just put in the chat the details of our employee vulnerability assessment, which we're offering free of charge to all the organisations that have attended. If you want to do an assessment of your employees and your volunteers, just to find out what is their knowledge around cybersecurity and their perceptions of risk. No obligation, just for us to give you a benchmarking of where you think you're at when it comes to human related risk. So on behalf of myself and the rest, I'd like to say thank you very much for attention today. Very much appreciated, and say we'd very much welcome your views and your thoughts. Please feel to stay online if you'd like to. Any closing remarks from the rest of the panel?
I would just add that Martyn said at the beginning, the most common phrase at the moment is "you're on mute." I would also say that I've never been to a meeting in the office when you finish by waving at everybody. It's entirely different.
Lovely, thank you very much. Anybody else, Gary, Saj, anything else to say, or are we all good? Are we all?
I'm just going to say thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it. It's been a great session. It's lovely to meet you all.
No, thank you very much for attending.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Yeah,
thank you.
If you want to join the CSF, give us a mail.
Yes, please do. And if anybody wants to have a follow-on of other topics, please let us know, and we're happy to run those again. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Any questions from those that are left? Chris, how did you find that session? Oh, we kind of heard you. Yeah, yeah, no.
Yeah. Oh, what did you say, Brian? I'm muted.
Yeah. Not like you to be speechless.
Oh, never. No, I really enjoyed it, and thank you very much for putting up with my little interdict. Over the last, over the last 4 months, I've been working with so many people who really are struggling with exactly all these problems, but they're the smaller organisations. So, as I've just been writing, they don't have an IT department. They don't have, in many cases, they don't have any IT people they can call on. One organisation I'm working with has an outsourced company who charge them 120 quid to pick up the phone. And, I can't for 1 minute believe that we can't do something better than that collectively.
Absolutely, and I think one of the things that here is that there is a lot of people that want to help, and I think that's one of the reasons for us sort of setting up. There is a group and there is a community, and I think there is an element of potentially an appetite to continue having that community where you can be self-serving and self-supporting.
Yeah, it's just we've got to somehow make it happen and put it in front of people that don't think they need it.
I think I completely sympathise with you, and I think you've come to the right group, and you've got Brian and Martyn and obviously Melanie and others who were and myself who are there to help. I think speaking very pointedly from a charities point of view, if you're not already a member of the security forum that Martyn and Brian have set up, that's a go-to place. But well, I do a lot of work with.
I've been a member of CSF since shortly after Brian started it.
Right. Well, there you go. So I'm relatively new to the actual forum itself. But I work with therapists. Right. If you talk about people who aren't really knowledgeable in this area and wanting to do things for the right reasons, I'm talking about people who are beauticians who are told that they were really good at talking to people and then suddenly set themselves up as therapists. So these guys have got no knowledge of, what a business or what it means to secure data. So, one person. So so I'm working with others to develop things that we can help, cheat sheets and all that sort of thing for an industry that really doesn't take security that seriously and doesn't really appreciate what they hold. So I do sympathise, but as I say to them, it's baby steps, start small, and grow from there.
That's exactly the point I'm making, really. That I'm working currently with 4 charities that are all in exactly the same boat as you've just described. It's not that they're naive; it's they're double naive because they don't know that they're naive.
So they don't know. You don't know what you don't know, do you?
Exactly. That's.
Yeah. Donald. I think most of us on here are old enough to remember Donald Rumsfeld's famous speech about there are known knowns and then there are known unknowns and then there are unknown unknowns, which perfectly describe the internet. So and where we are.
You mean like the fact that because we didn't detect any Russian interference, there wasn't any.
Yes.
Or was it because we wasn't looking for it?
Listen, we're talking virtually here. I'm saying nothing about the Russians. They are a lovely nation.
But on that note, before we get into too much detail, I can see that Mark's still on the call. Hi, Mark. Are you able to join us with audio just to let us know how you found this and given that it'd be nice to put a voice to is it a glass of beer?
I was just lurking there, wasn't I?
Hi, how are you doing? How did you find that?
It was interesting. For me, I was looking for more technical things that I need to cover.
Right, okay.
Possibly a baseline. You're talking about phishing, and I think about the domain names that we own and how we look after them, maintain them. it'd be nice to have a checklist for that sort of thing. Email authentication, DMARC, etc.
I was going to say, do you implement DMARC?
Yes. I mean, I emailed Brian and Martyn yesterday because it was doubtful. I didn't know whether we were able to attend today, and I was talking about configuring DNS, the basics. It's a protocol that's been around a long time, but you still see people who make mistakes in the way it's implemented. And if you don't fix those basic things, then the bad guys can build on that. It's just a basic hygiene on these sorts of things.
Yeah, so one of our other partners is the Global Cyber Alliance. So what we can actually do is a whole session on DMARC and DMARC implementation for charities, if that would be of interest, and I can get those guys to talk through it and the benefits of it, but also just how to be and what can go wrong when it's misconfigured.
I've been running DMARC reject mode for the BBK for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years now.
Right.
But it's interesting to see who's been abusing the domain. Originally, when I started out, the bad guys were using the domain more than we were.
Yeah.
You know, and that comes as a surprise to people when you talk about unknown unknowns. The people who in the charity who are using it, they send an email, it works. They don't think there's a problem.
Yeah.
You know?
Mark, you, in your email, you mentioned about BEC or CEO fraud. I thought that was an interesting topic that we didn't really touch on.
Yes.
I've certainly come across a few instances of that in charities. I just wondered whether you had a direct experience of it.
There was one of our trustees who, I think somebody was spoofing them and expecting the finance department to pay an invoice. And they even quoted an account number. Now, fortunately, they recognised this, but reporting it was an issue because presumably this bank account had been identified as receiving the proceeds of fraud. But how would you flag that up to the right people that maybe you should look at this bank account? It wasn't of benefit to us, but possibly other third parties who might be targeted. Yeah. So yes, I know. I think I was.
Yeah, I think probably now that we've got action fraud, which we didn't have that sort of centralised body for quite a while, but I don't know how effective they are, but at least it seems to be a central point. Gary's shaking his head. I know we talked to them, I think, early on, didn't we, Brian? I think we had them at one of the sessions. They certainly seemed to have got their act together, which was impressive, but possibly not going far enough.
No, they're not going for anywhere near far enough. They, to my mind, they are just simply an organisation that is just good for spitting out statistics, and that's pretty much it. You know, I want to be proven wrong, in as much as I'd love to be proven wrong about the ICO, but I think it's going to be a long time coming. You know, if these organisations, if I hear anyone come to me with a positive story about their interaction with action fraud, you know, I would be really, really pleased. So I'd love for somebody to do that and prove me wrong. But until that happens, for me, it's just another government department that is ineffective for what it was set up to do. So
yeah, well, we have the whole soccer thing, and then they got disbanded, and NCA, and goodness knows, it was difficult. I remember when we set up the forum, it was difficult to know which agency to there was nobody really interested. I remember having the local plod come into the Sally Ann to investigate some email-based, some comms stuff, and they were just completely baffled. We got an email full of not very nice diatribe, and the first response from the copper was, "Well, could you forward it to me?" No.
Yeah. But I mean, it's interesting. I mean, even in, like, you know, if you talk about international collaboration around cybercrime and such, I remember talking to an officer once where he said, you know, he was trying to subpoena a company in France to get them to, you know, the courts to freeze access to a server, or, you know, to stop the bad guys from being able to alter anything. And they said, yes, but you'll have to fax it to us. You'll have to fax this 28-page document. And it was just like, oh, I'm sorry, I can't fax you because of where I am. And they said, well, where are you? He said, I'm in 2019. It's not going to happen. It's just ridiculous. So, yeah, it's frightening. It is frightening. But interestingly enough, going back to the phishing conversation earlier, I don't know if anyone else has heard this or seen this. I've certainly seen a bit of a change in the attack method recently, which is a really poorly worded, quite clearly a phishing attempt will hit a company, everybody obviously says, oh, this is clearly phishing, it's ridiculous, poor grammar, look at, it's written so poorly. And then a really good email comes from the IT department saying, we are aware of the phishing attempt that has been perpetrated against us. Please do not click on links. This is a timely reminder. And, for a reminder of our security policy, please click on the link below.
Excellent. Really good.
The second email clearly is from the bad guys, but it's, and you've got to go, kudos to you guys. You are very,
I saw a really good example just the other day where somebody was pointing out all the UX, the user experience elements that have been crafted in this phishing email. I mean, it was a tour de force. Really, really good.
And this again comes back down to where some of the problems lie as well from an educational point of view, is people that are putting together marketing emails from charities as well, because their background necessarily isn't in marketing or information security. So they're drafting emails that have shortened links in it, that have images without image descriptions. So there's so many telltale signs in a marketing email that comes out from a charity that makes it suspect, is it a suspected phishing email when it's not, because of the practices that they're putting in as well. So it's, a double-edged, again, as you said, Martyn, a double-edged sword.
I've died on that particular hill a few times, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you've all hit on it, that I am still in this trying to help some very naive users. And the real thing, the real crux of it is those guys out there are doing some brilliant work. They are doing some great stuff. And I mean, the obvious ones are blooming obvious. But I did a little talk last week and I had to try and show on a screen how, obviously, if you hover over a URL and the URL doesn't match, that should be a clue. It might not mean anything, but it should be a serious clue. At which point you look at other clues. But it's so, as you say, Mel, it's so easy to copy logos, to copy styles, to copy backgrounds, to copy everything. You can create anything you want. I mean, the sad thing is that most of these people can't write, which is great for us. But
you're talking about marketing people there, or what?
Yeah, but even
oh, wash your mouth out, sir.
But even there, Chris, the psychological side of it, even there, one of the reasons we all know about the Nigerian prince emails, and yet, we look at those and we say, well, who can possibly fall for these things? They be under no illusion they wouldn't do them if no one was falling for them.
Yeah.
They absolutely are. And the reason that they do them so badly is because from a psychological perspective, just like good marketers, they're trying to weed out all the people like us who would go, well, that's clearly rubbish. I'm not going to respond to it. What they're looking for is that person who is distracted, under stress, greedy.
The non-challengers, the ones that aren't going to challenge it, that aren't going to question it, that aren't going to cause problems. Absolutely. No.
You're in their funnel and you're going to go down. I always respond to the print.
I would add into that one. The Santander ones that I've seen recently, fortunately, I don't have a Santander account. So it's obvious for me. But they're so good. The backgrounds are great, the logos are great, the wording is right, everything is right until you do the hover over the URL and you find it's .ru.
But if you got a similar email from HMRC, for example,
exactly,
and most of us pay in, get out, benefits, etc., etc. The people that don't have a Santander account, they've certainly got an account of sorts with HMRC.
Yeah.
And whoever's ever tried to do anything on HMRC, half the time I am convinced I'm off to a dodgy site because I can't work out where I'm meant to go, what I'm meant to do. And it's like, no, I hate it. The whole tax, VAT, gateway, you know, who knows whether it's right or wrong where I'm going.
Chris, I was just wondering if we organised a webinar for Charity Security 101. Do you think you could get your charities you're working with to join in on that?
I'm doing this at the moment exactly exactly what you say with Link Up London, who I also work with, who know a lot of our South London charities who are in exactly this situation. I did it for a bunch of people at the local library last week. I'm well happy to do it because it's just reusable stuff, and all you need to update it with is, you know, and here's yesterday's one. You know, it's very easy to do. Yes, Martyn, I'd be very, very happy to do it.
Well, maybe that's something we can think about.
Absolutely. So thank you very much, guys. I'm afraid I'm going to have to dip out because I've got another call to jump onto, but thank you so much. As I say, as an exploratory one, I think you've shown that there is an appetite there for it, and there is a lot that you guys can be covering in order to be able to address some of the risks. So it's, thank you very much for letting me sort of facilitate some of that. And like I say, if we can do another one in the future, let us know.
Thank you, Mel. Thank you, Georgina.
Thank you very much.
Thank
you.
Later.
Bye.
I suppose I better press the button.